It was the kind of winter morning where breath turned to mist, and the cold crept into your bones without warning. Snow dusted the sidewalk outside the old public library where a group of kids waited quietly for the bus. Among them was Jamal, a 17-year-old black teenager with a calm presence that stood out in the crowd. His hoodie was pulled tight against the wind, his headphones muffling the world as he nodded to a beat only he could hear. Jamal wasn't rich. He wasn't famous. But there was a light in his eyes, one that suggested he carried more wisdom than most his age. The kind of kid teachers always said had potential, but the system never seemed to invest in. On that same cold morning, halfway across the world of fantasy and myth, another figure walked in silence, his staff clicking softly on ancient stone. Gandalf the Grey. A wizard not of glittering robes and flamboyant spells, but of quiet strength and burdened wisdom. He was older than most could comprehend, shaped by wars, whispers, and a darkness far deeper than shadow. People often spoke of Gandalf's battle with the Balrog in hushed awe, how he fell into the depths of Moria and rose again, transformed. But few truly understood the fear that gripped him in those moments. Fewer still knew why he feared the Balrog more than even the Dark Lord Sauron himself. Back on the bus, Jamal looked up from his phone as a heavily pregnant woman stepped on. She looked tired, like she hadn't slept properly in days. Her belly made walking awkward, and the weight of judgment from other passengers seemed to press down even more. No one moved. No one even made eye contact. Without a word, Jamal stood up, offered his seat, and smiled gently. The woman hesitated, surprised, but accepted. She didn't say much at first. Just a nod and a quiet thank you. But when she got off a few stops later, she paused by Jamal, slipped a small folded note into his jacket pocket, and vanished into the crowd before he could ask anything. It seemed like nothing, a gesture of gratitude, maybe. Jamal didn't read it until later that night, sitting on his bed, the streetlights casting long shadows across the room. In that note were words that would change everything. Not just for Jamal, but for the people around him. Words that would ripple through his future like a stone dropped in water. And just like that, two stories began to unfold, one rooted in the streets of a modern city, the other buried in the myth of Middle-earth. But both would reveal a single, haunting truth, that the greatest dangers don't always wear the darkest crowns, and that sometimes what we fear most is not the evil we see, but the fire we recognize inside ourselves. Gandalf once said, "There are older and fouler things than orcs in the deep places of the world." The Balrog of Moria wasn't just a creature of flame and shadow. He was a remnant of an ancient rebellion, a mirror to what Gandalf might have become had he made different choices. That's why he feared it, not because it was stronger than Sauron, but because it reminded him of himself. And Jamal? He would soon discover that the note he received carried more than kind words. It held a secret about who he really was and what he was destined to become. Something that would test his courage, his heart, and his entire understanding of the world. Because sometimes, destiny doesn't knock. It sits down across from you on a cold morning bus ride. And it waits. But neither Gandalf nor Jamal were ready for what came next. Jamal sat on his bed, the note still warm in his hand. The paper was old-fashioned, like the kind you'd see in movies, slightly yellowed at the edges. The handwriting was careful, almost too perfect, like someone had taken their time to say something important. He unfolded it slowly, expecting maybe a kind thank you or a quote about kindness. But what he read stopped his heart cold. "You don't know me, but I've been looking for you. If you're reading this, then the time has come. My father owed your grandfather a debt, one that saved my life. You are owed something in return. Everything is about to change. Be ready. Evelyn." His eyes scanned the note again and again, trying to make sense of it. What debt? What did it mean, owed something? He didn't even know who his grandfather was, let alone some old family history tied to strangers. And why did this woman, this pregnant stranger, say she had been looking for him? The more Jamal thought about it, the more questions he had. Was it a joke? A scam? But something about the way she'd looked at him, like she knew him, had stuck in his mind. She hadn't looked surprised or confused when he offered a seat. She looked like she'd been waiting for that exact moment. Meanwhile, in the ancient world of Middle-earth, a much older kind of waiting had come to an end. Deep under the misty mountains, far beneath the ruined halls of Khazad-dûm, the Balrog stirred. For centuries, it had slumbered in silence, buried by stone and time. It had no name that men could speak, and it answered to no master. Not even Sauron. Fire still burned in its lungs, and shadow coiled like smoke around its soul. But it had waited, not for war, but for him. Gandalf had always known it was there. When the Fellowship entered the mines of Moria, he had paused longer than the others at the doors. Not because of the dwarven craftsmanship or even the warnings of orcs, but because he could feel it, the echo of something older than the darkness outside. Something that remembered him. There's a reason Gandalf feared the Balrog more than Sauron. Sauron was power-twisted by pride, but the Balrog was something worse. It was a fallen Maya, just like Gandalf. A spirit of fire that had once served the light, but had chosen destruction. In the Balrog, Gandalf saw what he himself might become, if ever he lost hope or purpose. And in that moment of hesitation at Moria's gates, he wasn't just deciding whether to go forward, he was choosing whether to face his past. Jamal didn't know any of this, of course. All he had was a note and 1,000 tangled thoughts. He tucked the letter into a shoebox under his bed, along with old birthday cards and a few family photos he couldn't throw away. He tried to sleep, but his mind wouldn't let go of the words. Everything is about to change. The next day at school, things felt different. The hallways looked the same, the teachers talked the same, but Jamal moved like he was in a fog. His best friend Marcus noticed right away. "Yo, you good?" Marcus asked between classes. Jamal hesitated. "Yeah, just didn't sleep much." "Tell me it's not about your essay for Mr. Franklin again." "Man, you stress too much." Jamal half smiled. He almost told him about the note, but something held him back. He didn't want to sound crazy. "Not yet." Instead, he said, "Nah, just weird dreams." But even that wasn't true. There were no dreams. Just silence. A strange kind of silence that followed him all day, like something was watching. After school, Jamal took a different route home. He walked past the library again, not sure what he was hoping for. Maybe the woman would be there. Maybe he'd get answers. But the bench was empty. The streets were cold. And just as he turned the corner to leave, he saw something strange, a symbol drawn in chalk on the brick wall. It looked like a sun with 3 lines running through it. He didn't know why, but it felt familiar. Like he'd seen it before, maybe in a dream long ago. He reached out to touch it, but the chalk crumbled under his fingers. Just a drawing. Just a coincidence. Or maybe not. Back in Middle-earth, Gandalf's steps echoed through the dark halls of Moria. His staff lit the way, but the shadows clung to the walls like memories. The dwarves had once called this place home, but now it belonged to silence and fear. He could feel the Balrog moving, not physically but spiritually. It wasn't chasing them yet. It was waiting for the moment they crossed a line too deep to return from. It wasn't just power that made the Balrog dangerous. It was understanding. The creature didn't roar blindly into battle. It watched. It judged. And it remembered the days when it, too, had stood for something more. When Gandalf finally stood on the bridge of Khazad-dûm, staring into the flame-filled eyes of the Balrog, he wasn't just fighting a monster. He was confronting the part of himself that had the potential to fall. That was the fear, not of death, but of becoming what he was sworn to destroy. Jamal sat at his kitchen table that night, the same symbol from the wall now drawn carefully on a piece of notebook paper. He didn't know what it meant. He didn't even know why he'd copied it, but something about it pulled at him. And then his phone buzzed. Unknown number. Just a single message. "You've seen the mark. You're not imagining it. We need to talk." His heart jumped. He stared at the screen, the message burning like a brand. He typed back, hand shaking. "Who is this?" 3 dots appeared, then stopped, then reappeared. "Evelyn. Meet me tomorrow. The library. 4 p.m. That night, Jamal didn't sleep again. And somewhere in the ancient memory of a dying world, Gandalf stood alone in the dark, staring into fire that looked all too familiar. He knew what was coming, and so did the Balrog. But neither Jamal nor Gandalf knew just how deeply their fates were entwined. Not yet. Jamal stood outside the library the next day, staring at its heavy wooden doors. The cold wind tugged at his hoodie, but he barely noticed. His hands were stuffed deep into his pockets, clenched around the note like it was a key to something he didn't yet understand. Every part of him wanted to walk away, to pretend the message was a mistake, to go home and forget this ever happened. But something stronger held him there. Curiosity, restlessness, and that strange feeling that his life was no longer entirely his own. He stepped inside. The warmth of the building didn't touch the chill in his chest. Books towered in long rows, the air thick with that familiar dusty scent. People moved around him quietly, eyes down, focused. No one looked like they were waiting for him. He walked past the front desk, past the shelves of biographies and fantasy novels, until he reached the back reading room. That's where he saw her, Evelyn. She was sitting by the window, dressed in a dark coat, the same one she'd worn on the bus. Her belly still round, but her eyes sharper than he remembered. She looked up as he approached, like she'd expected him to hesitate. "You came," she said simply. "You told me to," Jamal replied, his voice steady despite the storm inside him. "I didn't expect you to believe me," she said, gesturing for him to sit. "I didn't. I still don't. But you said my grandfather saved your father's life." She nodded. "He did. Before you were born. Before I was even pregnant. But none of this started with them. It started much earlier. What you've stepped into, it goes back generations. It's not just about kindness. It's about protection. About bloodlines. About power most people don't know exists." Jamal frowned. "What kind of power?" "Not magic. Not spells," she answered. "But something deeper. Something older. It's about truth. The kind that scares people. The kind that lives in fire and shadow." The words hit Jamal like an echo. Fire and shadow. He didn't know why, but the phrase pulled something from deep in his memory, like an image from a story he couldn't quite recall. In Middle-earth, Gandalf's mind wasn't calm either. After the battle with the orcs in Moria, his body was bruised, his spirit weary. But he knew the worst was still ahead. The Balrog wasn't hunting him in haste. It was drawing him in, luring him closer to a confrontation that would strip away all his illusions. And the others, the Fellowship, they didn't understand the danger. They only saw the wizard who had always known what to do. But Gandalf had never told them the truth, that the Balrog had once been like him. A Maya spirit, created with the same light, the same fire, but corrupted, seduced by Morgoth in the First Age. And now it lived only for destruction. He feared the Balrog because it was a reflection. If he failed, if he ever gave in to the pride or power that sometimes stirred in his own heart, he might become something just like it. That fear ran deeper than his fear of Sauron. Sauron ruled by domination, by rings and armies and cruelty. But the Balrog didn't need a throne. It was terror without ambition, power without a crown. Back in the library, Jamal sat forward. "I still don't understand. Why me?" "Because you were chosen a long time ago," Evelyn said. "Because your grandfather saw something he wasn't supposed to. And because someone has been watching your family ever since. The mark you saw? That wasn't random. It's part of a signal. A warning system passed down from generation to generation." "Signal for what?" She hesitated. "For when it returns." Jamal's heart thumped. "When what returns?" She leaned in closer, her voice low. "The fire. The one that burned through our world centuries ago. The force that used to walk in human form. The kind of evil that hides until it doesn't need to anymore." Jamal leaned back, his thoughts swirling. Was she serious? It sounded like a story, like some ancient myth. But he remembered the way the chalk symbol had made him feel, the way the note had made his hands shake. Something wasn't right. Something was coming. Meanwhile, across the worlds, the Balrog moved again. Not with fury, but with purpose. Its form was not just shadow, but memory. Its eyes burned not only with fire, but with judgment. It had seen the fall of kingdoms, the betrayal of brothers. It had once walked beside angels. Now it existed to test those who still believed in light. Gandalf knew he had only moments left before the bridge. He could feel the weight of the creature pressing against the stone from below. It was not yet here, but it was coming. And it would demand everything of him, not just his strength, but his faith. Not in magic, but in mercy. Back in the city, Jamal walked home slowly, Evelyn's words repeating in his head. A part of him still wanted to write her off as paranoid. But another part, the part that had always sensed there was something strange about the way his family never talked about the past, started to believe her. When he got home, he went straight to the closet and pulled down the box from under his bed. Photos, letters, old journals. He hadn't really looked through them before, but tonight he did. In one photo, he saw his grandfather, tall, proud, in a military uniform. Behind him stood a man Jamal didn't recognize. And behind him, drawn faintly in the corner of the photo, was the same symbol he'd seen on the brick wall. The sun with 3 lines through it. It wasn't a new symbol. It had been there all along. Jamal's phone buzzed again. Another message. They know you've seen it. You don't have much time. He looked out his window. The city lights flickered, and for a second, just a second, he thought he saw something move in the reflection. A shape. A flicker. Like flame. But when he turned around, there was nothing there. And far beneath the mountains of a forgotten world, the Balrog opened its eyes. Jamal couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him. It was like a shadow had slipped into his world, one no one else could see. He kept looking over his shoulder, but nothing was there. The city was normal. Loud, messy, alive. But ever since he'd read that note, ever since he met Evelyn and saw that symbol, the normal had started to feel hollow, like a thin layer hiding something darker beneath. He tried to go about his day. School, homework, helping his mom with groceries. But even his mom noticed how distracted he was. "You okay, baby?" she asked one evening, her eyes studying him as he pushed food around on his plate. "Yeah," he said automatically. "Just tired." She nodded slowly but didn't believe him. Mothers never do. Later that night, Jamal waited until the house was quiet, then pulled the box of photos back out. He took a closer look at the picture of his grandfather, studying the man beside him. The face was unfamiliar, but something about the eyes felt familiar, like looking into a mirror tilted back in time. He flipped the photo over and found something scrawled in faded pen. Khazad. 1962, fire still sleeps. That word, Khazad. It wasn't English. He searched it online, and immediately a flood of results came up, all tied to Tolkien's universe. Khazad-dûm. The dwarven city. Moria. Jamal's mind raced. That wasn't possible. His grandfather hadn't been a fantasy nerd. He was a soldier. A real man in a real war. But here was this word, and here was this photo, and here was this feeling in Jamal's chest like the walls of reality were shifting. Back in Middle-earth, Gandalf stood at the edge of the crumbling bridge of Khazad-dûm. The Balrog had emerged in full, massive, terrible, wings like storms, and a whip of living fire. Its roar shook the stone. But Gandalf didn't run. He didn't beg. He planted his staff into the bridge and faced the monster head-on. Not because he wanted to fight it, but because he had no other choice. The others, Frodo, Aragorn, Legolas, they were already across. This was Gandalf's moment alone. The darkness had caught up with him, and now he had to meet it with light. But even as the Balrog rose, something else stirred within Gandalf. A memory. A truth buried under years of pretending to be less than he was. He wasn't just a guide. He was Maya like the Balrog. And that made this more than a battle. It made it a reckoning. In Jamal's world, things were unraveling fast. He received another message. This one didn't come with words, just a photo. Grainy. Old. But unmistakable. It was a snapshot of his grandfather standing at the edge of a cave entrance. One that looked almost exactly like the entrances to the mines of Moria depicted in Lord of the Rings fan art. Except this wasn't fan art. This was real. Jamal's phone buzzed again. They're waking. You need to choose.
Come to the park.
Midnight. Alone. The park was only a few blocks away, but it felt like another world. Jamal could barely hear anything over the rush of his heartbeat as he walked past the empty basketball courts and broken streetlights. He clutched the photo in his hand like a shield, unsure if he was walking into answers, or something worse. Under the wide sky, he saw Evelyn again. She was standing near the old swings, the wind catching her coat. But she wasn't alone. A man stood next to her. Older, gray hair, wrinkles that looked carved by fire. Jamal stopped a few feet away, suddenly cold despite the mild night. "This is him?" the man asked Evelyn, never taking his eyes off Jamal. She nodded. The man stepped forward. "You've seen the signs. You feel it, don't you? That pull in your chest. The heat in your blood. You think you're just some kid from the city, but you're carrying something ancient. You were never meant to be ordinary." Jamal swallowed hard. "What am I supposed to be?" The man's eyes darkened. "A guardian. Like your grandfather. And like Gandalf before you." Jamal's breath caught. "Gandalf isn't real." The man looked almost sad. "That's what they want you to think. But stories hide truth. Names change. Places vanish. But some forces are too powerful to die. The Balrog wasn't just fantasy. It was real once. Maybe it still is. Some say its spirit has crossed into our world, burning through bloodlines, waiting for the right time to rise again." Jamal looked at Evelyn. "You told me my family was being watched." "Not just watched," she said. "Protected. You're the last in the line. If you fall, there's no one left to stop what's coming." Jamal shook his head. "I'm not special. I don't know magic. I'm not brave. I don't even know what I'm supposed to be fighting." "You're not fighting yet," the man said. "But soon you'll have to. Because the shadows are moving. Not just in books or legends, but here.
Now.
Power is shifting. And you, Jamal, you've been marked." As if on cue, the air around them shifted. A low rumble, barely audible, moved through the earth, as if something deep underground had stirred. In Moria, Gandalf raised his staff, shouting the words that echoed through time. "You shall not pass." His voice cracked through stone and flame, and for a moment, even the Balrog hesitated. In the city, the streetlights flickered. The shadows stretched unnaturally. And for the first time, Jamal felt it. A burning in his chest. Not painful, but deep. Like something ancient was waking up inside him. The man stepped back, eyes locked on Jamal. "It's starting. You need to decide who you are before it's too late." Jamal's phone buzzed one more time. He looked down and saw a final message. "The fire knows your name." The wind howled. The ground trembled. And Jamal knew, without understanding how, that the moment of truth was coming. And it would not wait much longer. Jamal stared at the screen, the words, "The fire knows your name," still glowing against the dark. His heart pounded like a drum, steady and loud, but it wasn't fear anymore. It was something else. A stirring, deep in his chest. Like a memory he never lived trying to surface. He looked up at Evelyn and the older man, but they were no longer just strangers. They were part of something bigger. And somehow he was too. Before he could speak, the ground trembled again, harder this time. Evelyn grabbed the man's arm, and for a split second, Jamal saw panic in her eyes. "It's too soon," she whispered. "What do you mean?" Jamal asked, his voice rising. "The barrier is breaking faster than we thought," the man said. "Someone or something is pushing from the other side." Jamal stepped back. "I thought this was about protecting a legacy, about stopping something from coming back." "It is," Evelyn said, her voice tight. "But now it's not just trying to come back. It's already halfway here." Suddenly, a loud crack echoed through the park. One of the streetlights exploded in a burst of sparks. Jamal turned toward the sound, and that's when he saw it. A figure, cloaked in black, standing under the broken light. He or it didn't move, just stood perfectly still. No face, no features. Just presence. And heat. Jamal could feel it even from 20 feet away. It radiated like a furnace, dry and hollow. He didn't know how, but he knew that whatever it wasn't human. The older man pushed Jamal behind him. "We have to go. Now." But it was too late. The figure raised one hand. The ground under Jamal cracked like dry ice, and a wave of heat washed over them, thick and smoky. Jamal stumbled, but didn't fall. Evelyn shouted something, words in a language Jamal didn't understand, and the fire slowed, just for a moment. Then the figure vanished. Not with a puff of smoke, not with a bang. Just gone, like it had never been there. Jamal's legs were shaking, but he stayed standing. "What was that?" That, the older man said, his face pale, was the first sign that the Balrog is no longer confined to myth. Something has found a way to bring pieces of it here. Through people. Through bloodlines. "You mean through me?" Jamal asked. "Maybe not just you," Evelyn said quietly. "But you're the key. Because you're not just tied to your grandfather. You're tied to him." Jamal looked at her, confused. "Who?" She reached into her coat and pulled out an old, torn journal. She flipped it open, carefully, until she found the page she was looking for. She held it out to Jamal. It was a photo. Blurry. Faded. But unmistakable. Gandalf. Not a drawing. Not a painting. A photograph. Black and white, full of scratches and age. But the man in the image was wearing the exact same robes, holding the same staff. Eyes filled with weight and wear. And behind him, standing much younger, was a man Jamal recognized. His grandfather. "No," Jamal breathed. "This can't be real." "It is," the older man said. "Your grandfather fought alongside the Maya in his final days. Not just in fantasy. In reality. There's a reason Tolkien's stories feel so real. They weren't invented. They were remembered." Jamal backed away, his head spinning. "That's impossible. It's a book. It's all a book. Sauron, the One Ring, Gandalf, Moria, it's fiction." "No," Evelyn said. "It's memory. And memories can fade, but they never vanish. Especially when they're protected by bloodlines." "But why me?" Jamal asked. "Why now?" "Because the fire is waking again," the man said. "And this time, it doesn't want to hide in shadows. It wants to rule in the open, like Sauron tried. But the Balrog is different. It doesn't need armies. It feeds on fear, on fire, on forgotten power. And you." He pointed at Jamal's chest. "You have it in you. The same kind of spirit Gandalf once did. That's why he feared the Balrog. Because he saw what he could have been if he chose wrong. And now, the same choice is coming for you." Jamal's mind reeled. Everything was shifting, faster than he could keep up. But before he could speak, Evelyn grabbed his wrist. Her eyes were wide. "Look." On his forearm, a faint glow was starting to emerge. A shape, simple, but unmistakable. The same symbol he'd seen on the wall, in the old photo, in the dreams that now didn't feel like dreams at all. The sun with 3 lines through it. It wasn't chalk this time. It was burning under his skin. Jamal yanked his arm back. "What's happening to me?" "You're changing," the man said. "Because something inside you is waking up. Something ancient." Then he added grimly, "And something else is waking with it." Before Jamal could ask what he meant, the ground trembled again, but this time stronger. The trees in the park shook. Somewhere in the distance, alarms started blaring. And Jamal knew, in that deep, unspoken way only truth can speak, that the first door had opened. Whatever had kept the fire trapped was failing. The Balrog was no longer just a memory from a forgotten war in a mythical world. Its shadow had already slipped through, and Jamal, whether he wanted to or not, was standing at the threshold. The park was trembling beneath Jamal's feet, the air thick with heat and something older than fear. The mark on his arm glowed brighter, pulsing like a heartbeat, and he could feel someone, pulling at him from inside. Not in a cruel way. It was heavy, but not hostile. It felt like fire asking if it could speak through him. Evelyn backed away, shielding her eyes from the light that poured out of Jamal's skin. It's happening, she whispered. He's waking up. Jamal dropped to his knees. He didn't scream, but he wanted to. The heat surged through him, twisting like wind inside a flame. He saw flashes, his grandfather standing at a stone gate, an army of shadows beyond it. Gandalf falling through blackness, wrapped in fire, his hand raised toward a light above. A woman crying over a child in a city torn by silence. Jamal didn't know what was real anymore, but something inside him did. The older man knelt beside him. You need to choose now. If you give in, the fire consumes. If you resist it, it will destroy you. But if you face it, really face it, you can become more than either. Jamal gritted his teeth. What am I choosing? To be the vessel, the man said. Or the gate. And then the earth split open. Not far from the swings where they'd stood minutes ago, a line of fire tore through the ground like a crack in glass. From that chasm rose the shadow again, taller, clearer, and now fully real. The figure had no face, but fire burned through its chest like a furnace. This was no illusion. It was part of the Balrog itself. A fragment. A shard of the ancient terror that once shook the halls of Moria. Evelyn stepped forward, arm raised, chanting something in that same forgotten language. The shadow hissed, recoiling slightly, but not stopping. Jamal stood. The heat no longer hurt. The light in his veins steadied. He looked the creature in the eyes, even though there were none, and suddenly, the world slowed. You feared him, Jamal said aloud, not knowing where the words came from. Gandalf feared you, because he saw himself. But I see more. I see your grief, your rage, your fall. The Balrog's fragment paused, and for the first time, it seemed unsure. You are like him, Jamal said, stepping forward. And like me, a being of power, meant for good, who lost his way. Flames swirled around the creature, but Jamal kept walking. His mark flared again. Now it wasn't just heat, it was clarity. And in the center of it all, Jamal understood. He wasn't a guardian. Not like they thought. He wasn't a warrior. He was something older. He was the bridge between what was and what could be. Not a vessel, not a gate, but something else entirely. He stopped just feet away from the shadow. You don't have to return through fear, he whispered. You can return through me. And in a flash, the creature lunged. Evelyn screamed. The older man reached for Jamal, but they were both too far. The fire collided with Jamal's chest and vanished. No explosion, no sound, just silence. Then light. It poured out from Jamal's body, not like fire, but like dawn. The park lit up in gold and white, every blade of grass standing tall, every tree bending inward as if bowing. The crack in the ground sealed shut. The mark on his arm faded, and the shadow was gone. Jamal stood still, breathing hard, sweat on his face, his clothes steaming, but he was alive.
Whole. Changed.
Evelyn stared at him in disbelief. You absorbed it. No, Jamal said, his voice distant. I understood it, and that gave it peace. The older man looked at him, like seeing something sacred. You did what none of us could. You didn't fight the fire. You healed it. But just as the tension seemed to settle, just as the air cooled, and the world started to return to normal, Jamal heard a voice. Not aloud. Inside. One fragment was all it took to awaken you. But others remain. Buried. Waiting. And they are not alone. Jamal's chest tightened. Did you hear that? Evelyn looked at him. Hear what? He didn't answer. He turned to the sky. Somewhere beyond the stars, something stirred. Not fire. Not shadow. But something colder. Ancient in a different way. Like silence before a storm. The Balrog had been feared by Gandalf not because it was the greatest threat, but because it was only the first one. The warning. The real danger was still coming. And this time, it wouldn't just test Jamal. It would test everyone. The park had fallen quiet again. The fire was gone, the sky calm, the ground still. Only the faint scent of ash hung in the air, like the last breath of a storm. Jamal stood alone at the center, his arms slack at his sides, the glow on his skin slowly fading. The mark was no longer burning. It had settled, still visible, but now resting, like a reminder of everything he had just faced. Evelyn and the older man approached him carefully, as if afraid to break whatever calm had just settled over him. Evelyn's eyes were wide, but not with fear anymore. Something closer to awe. "Is it over?" she asked. Jamal looked around. Everything felt quiet, but something inside him said it wasn't finished, only shifted.
"This part is," he said.
"The Balrog is gone. Or, at least, it found peace." The older man nodded. "That's more than anyone has ever managed. Even Gandalf didn't destroy it. He defeated it, banished it, but he never made it whole again. You did." Jamal didn't say anything for a while. His thoughts were heavy, like they were trying to find where to land. He kept thinking about Gandalf, not the mythical wizard, but the man in the photograph. The Maya spirit who once chose to walk among mortals to guide them, never force them. Who carried wisdom like a weight. Who feared the Balrog not because it was evil, but because he saw what he could have become. Jamal now understood that fear. He glanced at Evelyn. "You said this was about legacy, that it ran in blood." She nodded. "It does. But it's more than blood. It's about who you become when the world calls you to be more." "And the voice?" Jamal asked. "That last message, it said the Balrog was only one piece. That others are coming." The older man exhaled slowly. "It's true. What you faced tonight wasn't the full force of the ancient darkness. It was a warning, a spark. There are still remnants of the old world buried in places people have forgotten.
Some sleep under mountains.
Some hide in stories. And some, like the fire, are searching for vessels." Jamal looked down at his hand, flexing his fingers slowly. "So, what am I now? Some kind of protector?" "You're not just a protector," Evelyn said. "You're a mirror, like Gandalf was. What you carry inside you, light, fire, memory, it shows the world what it could become, for better or worse." That stuck with him. Not a warrior, not a hero, a mirror. The days that followed returned to a strange, sort of normal. School resumed. The city's noise came back. The bus routes kept running, and people went about their lives unaware that something ancient had tried to cross over just blocks from them. But Jamal saw things differently now. He noticed symbols hidden in graffiti, words whispered in dreamlike tones when he slept, and faces in crowds that watched him just a moment too long. The box under his bed no longer scared him. He opened it often, rereading the letters, studying the photos. There were pieces of the story everywhere. His grandfather had been part of something that crossed between worlds, and now Jamal understood the weight of what he left behind. He wasn't meant to be someone else. He was meant to become more of himself. He met with Evelyn and the older man regularly. They taught him what they could. Not spells. There was no wand, no hocus pocus. It was about language. Symbols. Intuition. Understanding the balance between shadow and light. Evelyn called it the deeper knowing. And as Jamal learned more, his senses sharpened. He didn't just see danger anymore, he felt when it was near. He understood that fear wasn't always something to fight. Sometimes it was something to listen to. One afternoon, weeks after the night in the park, he walked back to the bus stop where it had all started. The same bench. The same chill in the air. But this time, he wasn't the same kid. He sat there quietly, thinking about how it all began with something as simple as giving up his seat. A small act of kindness that spiraled into something cosmic. And that's when he realized something important. It wasn't just the fire that had been waiting. It was him, waiting to become who he was always meant to be. Waiting to find purpose in the ordinary. Waiting to be seen not for his fears, but for his choices. As the bus pulled up, a little girl holding her mother's hand stopped beside him. She looked up at him with wide eyes and smiled. "You're glowing," she said softly. Her mother laughed, not understanding, and guided her onto the bus. Jamal smiled too, not because he was glowing, but because someone could see it. Maybe she saw what he'd become. Or maybe she just saw the light in someone who had walked through fire and didn't burn. Later that evening, he found one more note in his coat. Folded neatly, no handwriting, just printed letters. It wasn't from Evelyn. Not from the older man. It said, "Peace is not the end. It's the pause before the next choice. Stay ready." There was no name, just a small drawing at the bottom. The same symbol. The sun with 3 lines. Jamal tucked it into the box, now filled with more than memories. It held lessons, warnings,
Truths.
and as he lay in bed that night, finally letting his body rest, he thought about Gandalf again. About how even someone as wise and powerful as him once doubted himself. How he stood on a bridge and said, "You shall not pass," not just to a monster, but to his own reflection. That took courage. Jamal hadn't used a sword. He hadn't fought with fists or magic. He faced the fire with understanding. He chose to see the pain behind the rage. And maybe that's what made the real difference. Because the greatest strength isn't always in the power you carry. Sometimes, it's in what you choose to do with the fire inside you. And that choice is what separates a legend from a monster. A guardian from a shadow. A boy from a vessel. The story ended where it began, with a quiet act of kindness. But everything had changed. And somewhere, in the cracks of worlds still hidden, the fire watched. Not with hunger, but with hope.